Hi everyone, this is Udit from Prepfully, and today we're going to be talking to Tyler. Tyler works as a product marketing manager at Meta, which she joined straight out of her MBA at Harvard. We'll be exploring her journey to becoming a PMM, how she got there, and her tips for people aspiring to enter this role. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Very excited to have you on board. Right then, to start, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you do, and the likes.
Yeah. So Tyler Simpson, I am originally from Georgia, ended up moving up to the Northeast in the US, lived across both New York and New Jersey, played basketball my whole life. And then right out of college was actually fortunate enough to go work at the National Basketball Association. So for my first 5 years out of college, worked there in a few different roles, spanning like our sponsorship group, our merchandising group, and a few other like international business roles. After about 5 years, I wanted to switch into an industry that was a little more agile, something that helped me get agency over the things I was building. So I decided to go get my MBA, and I went to Harvard Business School for 2 years. And during that summer, interned at Facebook, at what was then called Facebook, as a product marketing manager, and rejoined full time in June of 2020. So have been at now Meta ever since, over doing a few different roles, and happy to dive into all that detail in a bit. But I've really enjoyed being a PMM here.
Hi, I'm Udit from Prepfully, and you're watching our Day in the Life video series. These are short conversations with folks who really know what they're talking about, all the way from craft skills to interview prep, from getting the first job to senior level career transitions. So, lots of unique insights and experiences distilled into key takeaways for you. We hope you find this useful. Yeah, that's quite a journey from college to basketball to MBA to Meta. So, tell us a little bit about what you do on a day to day basis as a PMM.
Yeah. So my day is obviously like any job. It changes every single day, every single week, depending on what the problems are. But if I had to summarize, a vast majority of what I work on is how to help the product team make better decisions about what to build. So this will manifest in a few different ways, mainly doing some research up front to justify that we need to, in fact, invest in a certain product direction, helping the team think through the strategy. And then, like, once we've kind of decided that we are ready to take something to market and build something, working on that alpha and beta testing and helping the team really think through how are we going to test the functionality, how are we going to test whether or not it's creating value. And then once something is ready to roll out, really thinking through how do we then drive adoption for that product? How do we make sure it's operating as intended, reaching the audiences that we thought it was supposed to serve? And ultimately, how is it also working within the ecosystem of Meta? So obviously, no product here works in a silo, although some products can be built in a silo. It's definitely important to keep in mind, like, to what extent our investments are supporting other teams and how are we helping the company as a whole reach our goals. So it'll vary a lot day to day, but some version of research usually is involved, some version of strategy work, some version of testing, and then ultimately driving that go to market to make sure we're getting the products to the person they're intended to reach.
Yeah, so basically a sort of like a wrapper role that ensures that a product is successful, all the way from figuring out the strategy behind what you build and making sure there's some degree of product market fit there, all the way through the launch planning and ensuring that it is a successful launch, and to some extent maybe also a little bit of the internal positioning to make sure that it's both appropriately evangelized within the company but also has its place. That's
Absolutely. That's exactly
quite
right.
overarching role then. So tell us a little bit about what you like the most about this role. What drives you?
Yeah. I really like the ability to take a 30,000-foot view at how the product fits into the ecosystem of what we're doing here at Meta. So on the AR commerce side, a lot of what I'm focused on is thinking through ultimately, like, what are we building to help support commerce in general on Meta, but then also to what extent does what I do feed into the metaverse, and how are we kind of helping democratize access to that through augmented reality? And these are like really big questions. They're very big 0 to 1 questions that like no one has answered before. Our competition is doing a lot in the space. So like it's really energizing to see all these other companies invest in it. And then we're investing as well. and then taking the steps to help our team understand, like, this is the direction we need to go in now, given where the product is at this moment. So being able to be that driving force or support the team in that capacity is really exciting.
All right. Good. And then like from what it sounds like, it's both the ability to think high level about the long term of something, but also the macro perspective of something, but also then add a pragmatic level of the competitive and the market landscape into the equation. That sounds like what makes this role exciting for you. So thanks for sharing that. Tell us a little bit, like I'd like to delve, if you're up for it, into the skills, for instance, that it took to get into this role, but also the skills you feel help you succeed in this role. So maybe let's do the second one first, because it ties directly to the sort of things you were telling us you enjoyed doing. What are some of the top few skills you feel a PMM needs to have in order to succeed at this role?
Yeah. So ultimately, if a PMM's role is to help influence the product team and support them in the strategy of what they're building, as well as the go-to-market, it's really important to be able to have a deep product sense. And by that, I mean, in order to actually give proper guidance on the direction that we should be building something in, you also have to have a deep understanding of how a user is going to interact with this product ultimately. What are the decision making checkpoints that they're going through in their mind as they engage with the product? And then as such, how does that then inform what you tell or what you advise the team to think about? So product sense is definitely number one. Number two would be a really good understanding of how to create or having a strategic mindset is probably the best way to think of it. So in business school, we talk a lot about Porter's 5 forces and needing and that being a framework by which you set a strategy, dictate a strategy, all that sort of stuff. I'm surprised at how accurate that is in the real world too. You know, in theory, a lot of frameworks can be really theoretical and seem to only work as you look at a strategy retrospectively. But I do see myself employing a lot of what I learned in business school around strategy in my day-to-day life, because it's really critical to make sure I have that holistic understanding of what's going on in the market and making sure I educate my team about that so that they can be well-informed and prepared to do what's next. So definitely strategic mindset. The last one is communication skills. Ultimately, the first two things don't matter if you don't know how to communicate effectively. And more tactically, what that's going to look like is being able to succinctly communicate information via a written text, via some sort of speaking engagement, via some like in meetings, and being able to use everyone's time efficiently and also direct people in the right direction. So spewing out information is not that useful to a product manager who is time strapped. They have a lot of constraints and like a lot of things they have to think through, but being incredibly clear about this is what the research says, this is what I think we should do, these are your options, these are the pros and cons of each option, I'd still go with option one, and these are the reasons why, and giving them all the information to make a decision, but doing it efficiently, I've noticed is definitely the most important thing to do.
Much appreciate you sharing that. Like then, if I'm interpreting this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, skill number one is product sense, specifically being able to empathize with your customers, but also then translating that empathy into something that makes sense in a product for them, and making sure this is well researched and well thought out and communicated with the rest of the team. Which then led to your second point, which was
like a strategic mindset. So like as you kind of go about the decision-making process, how thoughtful are you being about all the constraints and all the inputs that go into building that strategy?
Yeah, so not just the theoretical knowledge, but also taking what may seem like ancient frameworks like Porter's 5 forces, but actually applying them in real life in as effective a manner as possible. And then the third is communicating the right level of information in the right format to the right people with the right, outcomes that they'd want from it so that they can action on it as effectively as possible. So lots packaged within that answer. And this probably ties a little bit into, for instance, what you might recommend in terms of preparing for an interview for this role as well, because I suspect these skills are pretty much what people are filtering for. So let's talk a little bit about how you prepared and maybe some advice on how to surface these skills that you just articulated in an interview, but also a little bit about what your interview journey was like. How did you go about preparing and succeeding in this?
Yeah. So for me, the prep was really focusing on how do I get as much information about the company as possible. I want to come into the interview incredibly informed about their strategic priorities, their challenges, what's going on in the market, in their particular market. So reading a lot of the financial statements for all the public companies, and then for the private companies, getting the information through The Verge or TechCrunch or other public resources was really helpful in just building a baseline understanding of what's going on at the company level. And then two, using resources that have clarity on what the interview process is like per company. So there's a lot of resources out there that explain exactly what you'll experience in the interview process. So making sure I had clarity on that was really, really helpful. The third thing I did was a lot of practice interviews. I can't understate that enough. I think the biggest mistake someone can make is not practicing their answers, and also not using frameworks to actually answer questions. So a lot of PMM interviews are adjacent to product manager interviews. So it's usually safe to be able to use frameworks that might be intended for product manager interviews in PMM interviews. As you'll probably get questions about what's going on in the market. You'll probably get questions about products. You'll probably get questions about marketing a product, and data questions. So just being able to frame your answers in a way that the interviewer can understand them is usually incredibly important, and is usually something that factors in to your success in the interview. So practicing. I'd spend mass majority of my time doing that, but then practicing with those frameworks is what's going to get you through the door.
No, but there was actually a hidden nugget of wisdom in there, because a lot, like at Prepfully, we get a lot of inbound requests from PMMs looking for interview advice. And there is a dearth of good quality content out there on the internet for this particular role. But there's a surplus, I'd say, for the product role, product management role in particular. So potentially just reapplying those resources and customizing them. And of course, you'll have to build on top of them, because ultimately there are expectations of PMMs, particularly when it comes to go-to-market and launch strategy and testing hypotheses, that aren't there to the same depth necessarily for product managers. So you'll have to definitely massage the knowledge out there and convert it into wisdom that's applicable for your own use case. But then there's a lot of material to potentially leverage on that front as well. Well, that's
Absolutely
a good takeaway for our audience. I'd like to deep dive a little bit into the preparation part and the juggling of priorities, because you entered Meta, and you must, as an intern, and that necessarily means that when you were in college, there was all the college workload to handle, but then also all the roles to evaluate, pick, and then prepare for. How did you juggle priorities? How did you make time for this, so to speak, given everything else that was going on as well?
Yeah. So I think one thing that business school does is that they're very intentional about making sure that you have time to get a job, because ultimately the end goal is to get you employed. So usually I kind of time boxed my week and thought about it from the perspective of, okay, what readings do I have? What homework do I have? And to what extent can I plug that into a certain part of my day, and then dedicate other sections for interviewing. So for me, focusing on homework type things in the morning, before class, and making sure I got that done. And then in the afternoon, where a lot of people were free and I was able to get on calendars with a lot more folks, using that time to actually do interview prep, and working with a group of people doing a similar job is actually really helpful. So what you'll see in consulting a lot is that all the consulting people will go do cases together. I'd say that tech has now reached a point where enough people are interviewing for these roles where you can easily go find at least 4 or 5 other folks interviewing for tech roles and practice with them. And then there's also some free resources online that I found of people that allow kind of scheduling with other folks who are also interviewing for similar roles. And I thought those were really helpful when I was interviewing outside of a school environment and looking at stuff like that. So really just figuring out how to get things done as efficiently as possible and collaborate with others when possible was really helpful.
Getting a little bit of too many things done is maybe a mandatory part of job descriptions these days. Yeah. It's a forcing function to get into that environment and put yourself in the shoes of what it's going to be like. So that's probably a good thing. But indeed, as you alluded to earlier as well, just practice is key, and that's something that I think is a key takeaway for our audience as well. I have one last question for you. If you had to give any piece or pieces, if you're up for it, of advice to folks who are currently doing their MBAs but considering PMM roles, maybe haven't yet decided on it, what would you say to them? Or another way of framing this is, if there was advice that you could have received at that point yourself, that you could now deliver to yourself, what would that look like?
Yeah. So for PMM roles, I will say a lot of them are different across different tech companies. So it's definitely worth calling that out and keeping in mind. For the PMM roles that were really intriguing to me, the best thing I did as I was going through my prep was talking to someone in that role. So LinkedIn stalk everyone, like see who, throw out a lot of requests and asks and see who will talk to you, because building clarity about what that specific role at that company calls for is really important to make sure that you're prepping in the right direction and that it as a role aligns with your priorities. So getting deep clarity on like what the actual day-to-day experience would be really helps with the holistic process of both making a decision on whether you want to apply and then ultimately the prep process, which is generally different for most tech companies, was particularly different for Meta, I will say, but getting ahead of it and building clarity on the role is going to unlock a lot of possibilities.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing all that knowledge, dare I say wisdom, with us in this call. I'm sure our audience are going to be really appreciative of it. Thanks so much for joining us again, Tyler. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please subscribe. Our website is prepfully.com. We've got lots of interview questions there. You can also schedule a mock interview with one of our experts. You can find the link in the description below. All the best from us at Prepfully, and we hope you totally rock your interview.